Okay, now I'd like to talk about some concrete applications or use cases of PLR. So here is a care record application based upon PLR, which is operative for more than 70 residents at a nursery care home in Koith, Yamanashi Prefecture right now. So this is what it looks like on the main major user interface. Each line of this represents some event, like in this case, this is a dinner, this is your body temperature, and so on and so forth. And there are some menu for different categories of these events and based upon some ontology. And this is a more detailed part of the menu, which talks about the mode of your urination and so on. And what is remarkable or important in this line of research is that in last August, some part of the operation of this application has been changed a little bit. That is, the care record data of this old woman. Well, actually, it's an old man, but in this picture, it's an old woman. But this person's care record data used to be managed by the nursing care home before this time. We changed the operation a little bit in such a way that her data is managed by her family members. And her family member discloses the data she manages back to the nursing care home so that the care home staff can further write into the care record and after that as well. In addition to that, now that her family member is managing her data here, it is possible for her to disclose the data to anybody else, like your home doctor, for instance, or other nursing care home in order to collect the second opinions and so on, without saying anything to the nursing home. So in that sense, the data management is totally up to the family member of this older person. And another thing which is important here is that this is very scalable because it's a distributed system. This operation can be extensible to billions of people as it is. Although it is applied to just one person, but it can be extensible to as many people as possible, as many people as you want. Here I'd like to talk about healthcare system in Japan. It's basically 100% public insurance. It addresses this healthcare system in Japan. And according to the reliable statistics, the Japanese healthcare system has best cost performance among OECD countries. However, it is at escalating financial crisis, like in any other country as well. So it's a very difficult problem. And another thing which is quite special to Japanese situation is that we have free accesses to medical organization. We patients can freely visit any hospitals, any clinic. This causes an inefficiency in Japanese healthcare system because many people tend to visit big hospitals from the outset rather than going to small clinics. So that it is difficult for big hospitals to concentrate on difficult cases. That's a huge inefficiency in the Japanese healthcare service system. So the government wants to reform the situation in many other different ways as well. And another issue is that the collaboration among service providers, hospitals and clinics, is lacking in Japan. For instance, neighboring hospitals have expensive equipment such as MRI and positron emission tomography machines. Although, for instance, MRI and PET would be necessary, one PET would be enough for this small city, but in reality, there are several of these machines at neighboring hospitals in very small regions. And another thing is medical organizations like hospitals keep patients' medical data, which may not be the case in many different countries. So for instance, in China and India and Indonesia and Thailand, in those countries, in most cases, medical data are kept by patients rather than medical organizations, at least so far. And related to this thing, hospitals or clinics don't benefit by disclosing medical data to each other and patients either. That's another cause of inefficiency because that would cause some double checking and double diagnosis and not maybe operation, but double treatments in different medical services happening all over in Japan. So this is the current situation. However, sharing health data is becoming mandatory due to the healthcare system reform, which is being carried out and to be finished in 2025. This consists of several important aspects. One is the categorization of hospitals in each secondary medical region for optimal allocation of medical resources. And related to that, some kind of vertical labor division will be introduced in the regional medical services. So acute hospitals are in charge of hospitalization and a very high-tech sort of medical care. And recovery hospitals are in charge of recovery care, which is not very acute, like in the cases of acute hospital. And clinics are in charge of home care support mainly. And for instance, for the sake of clinic, in order for them to be recognized as doing home care support, they must be providing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week basis service to every patient. However, it's totally impossible because most clinics would have just one medical doctor and 2-3 nurses, right? So in order to provide 24 hours a day, 7 days a week service, several clinics, like 4 or 5 clinics, must form a group and take care of some each patient. And in order to do that, they must share the patient's data with each other. And the similar situations apply to acute hospitals and recovery hospitals and other kinds of medical organizations as well. So that's healthcare reform, which is currently advanced by the government. So data sharing for collaboration under this labor division is mandatory. Hospitals, clinics, nursing care providers, pharmacies, social workers, patients, family members, and so on. Everybody must collaborate by sharing information. But the problem is how to implement that data sharing. And the only solution to that problem is autonomous, distributed, and collaborative healthcare based upon decentralized PDS like PLR. Because although there have been so-called EHRs, which is a service to share data among medical organizations, EHRs are very costly, and there are so few patients to be involved in EHR. So the cost benefit is quite low in the operation of EHR. So in order to spread the data sharing among medical organizations nationwide, the only way is to introduce PLR or decentralized PDS in general. So this is a picture in which each individual patient mediates the cooperation among different medical or healthcare organizations, vendors. This is necessary because these vendors have difficulty in cooperating with each other directly because they very often compete with each other. So two neighboring hospitals may be competing quite often. So it is quite difficult socially for them to cooperate directly. However, each of these vendors are willing to collaborate with its customers, individual patients, so that each patient will be able to mediate indirect collaboration among these vendors. And that's done by introducing PLR. So that's basic usage of PLR to mediate indirect cooperation among vendors. And this is a little advanced use case of decentralized PDS. That is called VRM. Sorry, I forgot to write down what VRM is acronym for. VRM stands for Vendor Relationship Management, which is to be compared with CRM, which is Customer Relationship Management. Customer Relationship Management is for vendors to optimize sales to their customers. Whereas VRM, Vendor Relationship Management, is for the customers to optimize their shopping, their purchase from the vendors. So it's totally the other way around. And this is a very simple, typical decentralized case of VRM. Using PLR or decentralized PDS, each customer, each consumer stores and manages his or her own data. And vendors, each vendor discloses advertisement and or information related to their products and services like these. So in this case, we suppose this vendor is a city office or something like that. So vendors would disclose these pieces of information in public. And the customers or individuals would delegate the search over these different pieces of advertisement information using each individual's personal data. So, for instance, this guy would give his personal data to his software agent to search for relevant information from this public data and pulls this information from here. So in this case, he would be able to join AKB48 concert on Sunday. And in his case, it is better for him to go through health check by August 25. Because these are pieces of information relevant to each of these individual consumer. And what is nice in doing that is, first, vendors can reach customers better than by behavioral targeting without risking personal information leakage. If you remember the incident of Venese 2 years ago, what happened then was Venese Corporation was using their customers' personal data, like family composition and so on and so forth, in order to send an appropriate direct mails to each of these individuals. And they used information like this family has a small boy who is going to enter a primary school next spring. So we would send this kind of direct mail to this family and so on and so forth. So that sort of personal data has been used in sending out different sorts of direct mails to different families. And what happened after that was this kind of personal data was stolen by some bad guy, and the data was sold to companies including Just Systems. And Just System did a similar thing as Benesse, and many people noticed that something went wrong. Right? So many companies, including Benesse, are facing very severe risk about this kind of personal information leakage. And in fact, Benesse is in very bad situation still right now. But in doing this kind of VRM, vendors can avoid that sort of risk at all, because they don't have to, own or store any piece of personal data in order to send advertisement-like information to appropriate potential customers. They're going to just disclose these pieces of information, and it is individuals to search this database for the information relevant to them. And the individuals can obtain useful information without exposing their personal information either. And another thing is the matching between the services or products and individuals' needs is much better in the case of VRM than in the case of CRM, because in the case of CRM, it is vendors to collect personal information of the customers, but that collection is utterly impossible, imperfect. Very partial collection is possible. However, in the case of VRM, it is up to the individuals who collect their own personal data. That collection is much more perfect, much more rich, much richer than the data collection by the vendor. So the matching between their needs and their products and services is much better in the case of VRM. So VRM is cheaper and safer and more efficient, both for the vendors and the customers. However, how many individuals and how many vendors are there in the world? Or maybe in Japan, there are as many as 130 million individual consumers versus more than 4 million vendors, even in Japan. So it's impossible for each customer to search for databases of 4 million vendors, right? So in order to implement much more total matching between the customers and vendors, there must be some business operators called a mediator, which is responsible for matching between individuals' needs and products and services of the vendors. So for instance, each customer would disclose her needs, like I like blah, 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 and I want blah, blah, blah. I'm willing to pay, this and that amount of money for that. And on the side of the vendors, some of these vendors would propose that such and such service is effective for blah, blah, blah. Its monthly fee is only this and this. And the mediator collects these pieces of information, these pieces of requests for proposals from the individual people, and also these pieces of information about the products and services from the vendors, and match between these pieces of information and those pieces of information, of course automatically rather than manually, because there are so many of them. So this matching would be possible, automatic matching would be possible by using some kind of artificial intelligence technology. And the results would be provided to both the individuals and vendors. The individual would receive some matching results. So for instance, the mediator would tell this individual that you may be interested in such and such products and services, right? And also the mediator would be able to tell these vendors something useful, like maybe this product of yours would be selling more if you change this aspect that way. Or your service, the market response to your service is such and such. So that sort of useful information will be provided to the vendors by the mediators. Okay, this is the social relationship among different sorts of players in this whole picture. Individuals would be operating PLR or decentralized PDS. And there are many vendors collaborating or communicating, transacting with individuals. And in order to, before actual transaction between these two, you must match between individuals' needs and vendors' services or products. And that matching is up to mediator. So in order to do that, the mediator collects personal requests for proposals from the individuals, and also it collects the information about goods and services from vendors, and mediator matches between these and that. And the result will be returned to the individuals and also the vendors. And in order to carry out this kind of matching and many other sorts of statistical analysis and so on and so forth, the data must fit into some standardized format, and that format will be defined by some common standard ontology, and that ontology would be maintained by some registration authority. And the behavior of this mediator, these mediators, would be audited by some third-party organization. So this is the whole picture. And the possible service of a healthcare mediator to individual patients would look like this. So this patient A would be disclosing these kind of information to the healthcare mediator. And response to that, this mediator would be providing her with some useful information. Like, so she would know that 2.3% of people are like me in terms of my body or healthcare condition. Or people like me are taking such and such medicines and doing quite well, better off. Or people like me treated at this hospital have 60% chance of surviving 5 years, right? That would be a very useful information to select the right hospital for you. And you will be paying some money for that if you are in a very severe disease, fatal disease, like cancer or something. Okay, so much for mediator. This is another aspect of mediator. That's to aggregate and analysis of personal data. Mediator is collecting personal data like this and also like this. So she says she wants something because I have these and those features, and that may be very delicate personal information. So the mediator is collecting these pieces of personal data. So there is going to be a huge, big personal data in here. And the mediator will be able to let some other party who wants to analyze this big data and let him analyze the data. Without handing the raw data to him. So the mediator would promise to its customers that, okay, I would manage some of your data, but I never hand those pieces of data to anybody else. So please please feel safe and provide your data to me. So in that situation, you would be more willing to provide your data to mediator. Okay, that's the story about mediator. And let's go back to more basic aspect of decentralized PDS. What I'm going to talk about here is smart disclosure. So the combination of smart disclosure and decentralized PDS would implement very rich flow of personal data in the society. So this picture is depicts traditional data flow among organizations of vendors, and new types of data flow, individual-based data flow, centering around the individual people. So if organizations, vendors, does some smart disclosure to individuals, where smart disclosure means provision as easy to use electronic data. So if vendors provide personal data they own to the data subject, then the data subject will be able to manage that data by using PLR or decentralized PDS in order to provide that data to another organization or vendor or some other people as well. Okay, so decentralized PDS receiving data from organization by smart disclosure and provision of the data to other organizations, and all that would implement much richer data circulating in the society. Right? The traditional way of data flow, personal data flow among organizations or vendors were limited in terms of the quality and the detailedness and the coverage of the data. Because each organization basically have the kind of data which is associated with the service they provide. And it's quite difficult for them to obtain the data originating from other organizations, because those pieces of data is personal data, and there is a very strict regulation against transferring personal data from one organization to another. So it's difficult to transfer personal information among organizations. However, if individuals are involved in this data flow, then he or she can give explicit consent to the data flow about his personal or her personal data from one organization to another. So in addition to this traditional data flow, you can build upon this new system of individual-based data flow. The total system would be much richer system for circulating very useful personal data. And the issue is how to implement smart disclosure, right? So what's the incentive for vendors to do smart disclosure? The incentive for the vendors is to develop some trust relationship with the customers. You've been hearing about IoT, Internet of Things. And what IoT means is that individual people are going to be the main source of rich data, right? There are so many sensors and so many personal devices which create your own data originating from yourself. So each customer, each consumer, each individual is going to be more important as a data source. So vendors has a desperate needs to acquire those pieces of data from their customers, right? But how do they acquire data from their customers? There must be some trust relationship between the vendor and the customer. But how can they build up this kind of trust? One necessary thing would be to do smart disclosure. Disclosure of the personal data to the data subject himself would be a vital source of this trust relationship between the two, right? On the other hand, the individual is able to collect data from online services or electronic services like Google Fit and Apple's Health Kit. And this is Omlong and Tanita, Amazon, Rakuten, and Net supermarkets, Expedia, and those. There are many of these online or electronic services which store your personal data, your personal transaction data about your behavior and purchase and so on. And by using some simple application, you can automatically collect these pieces of data at hand and manage those data by PLR, right? And if there is a trust relationship between the vendor and you, the individual, then you will be willing to disclose those pieces of data to the vendor, right? And the vendor, for instance, a retailer, can collect data from its customers shopping from other retailers and use the data for the sake of product development purchase. And what is important is this yellow stuff. Okay, in order to obtain personal data from the customers, the organization, the vendor, must do smart disclosure. That means, of course, the vendor may be worrying that my data, the data I'm managing, may be handed over to some other competing vendors, right? However, that doesn't happen before your competitor does smart disclosure. So you're going to do smart disclosure first. Then you would enjoy very huge first mover advantage, right? So the first mover towards smart disclosure can obtain personal data originating from other competitors, from other vendors, while your competitors are not yet doing smart disclosure. So the organizations would be willing to do smart disclosure earlier than others in order to get first mover advantage. So this could be implemented as some part of law or as the functionality of PLR and so on. Okay, this is the final part of my lecture. So what I mean by distributed big data is that its benefit comes from the fact that only you, the individual, can collect all your own personal data. And even Google have not been able to collect medical data quite a lot. And vendors, what should vendors do? They should be ready to collect data whenever necessary, rather than collecting big data from the outset. Because from the outset, in the beginning, you don't know how to use the data and how to collect the data, how to collect which kind of data and from whom and so on. So trying to collect big personal data from the outset is very costly and waste of time and money. So it is more efficient and productive to try to be ready to collect data whenever necessary from the individual, from your customers. And gather big data only when the purpose and analysis methods and data sources are clear. Since each individual totally stores and manages her own data by PLR or distributed, decentralized PDS, vendors doesn't have to collect data from the outset. And if a vendor accesses necessary data with individual data subject consent, then the vendor can gather data, obtain analysis result, and abandon original data. Because the data can be erased from their database because the master data is in the part of the individuals. The vendor can re-obtain the data at any time later on. Okay, who is a beneficiary of decentralized PDS? Of course, we, consumers, individuals, would be enjoying the benefit. However, the biggest beneficiaries are huge B2C operators, knowing many clients' PLR IDs, like these guys, right? So when PLR or decentralized PDS is spread, then behavior targeting advertisement would disappear. So in that situation, what Google is going to do? They will be doing mediator, nothing else. But that would bring about a much, much larger benefit for them. And another chance for these vendors would be, for instance, VRM would fit Amazon's business model. And if Amazon does VRM, then drastic reduction of cost for personal data management and recommendation would be possible. And their sales would increase due to more precise matching between their goods and services with their customers. So Amazon is willing to maybe entering this new world of personal data circulation. There are huge, first of all, advantage in not just for Google and Amazon, but for many other firms and vendors, and governments as well. I think this is the final slide. Second final one. So decentralized management of personal data by decentralized PDS is far more secure and convenient and productive than centralized management. Of course, I am not saying that centralized management is necessary, because companies, vendors must carry out some centralized management about the data, like the customer's contact address or phone number and so on and so forth, and the contract with the customers as well. So some data must be centrally controlled, but many other pieces of information should be decentralized. And new profitable services emerge by having each individual manage her own data. For instance, personalized rehabilitation at athletic gyms and personalized meal delivery and so forth would be possible if individual patients or individual caretakers or their family members manage their healthcare data, rather than hospitals and care homes only manage their data. This is actually the final slide. So in summary, centralized management of personal data blocks innovations in many respects. First one is cost and risk of management and limited data circulation. So vendors are not willing to disclose data to their competitors, and that causes a limited data circulation and market monopoly and suppression of service inventions. On the other hand, on the contrary, self-information control promotes innovations in as many respects as well. Personal management of your own data would make it possible to disclose data based on your own will for the sake of your own benefit. Because you individuals are main beneficiaries of B2C services, it is optional for you to control your own data. And that would lower the barrier for market entry for new business operators. And also, as I said, as I talked about in the use case of a medical mediator, healthcare mediator, collective evaluation of services is possible. So for instance, you can compare the performances of different hospitals in terms of various disease cases, for example. And all these would make it easy to invent new services. Right, so that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to welcome questions and comments. Any questions? Okay.
I have a question regarding the memory space for storing data. So in this system, individuals collect the data and they store this data inside their local memory.
Yeah.
In some real-time application, this amount of data increases very quickly. So what happens if you do not have enough memory space to store?
You can extend your allocation here, right? By paying like $10 a month.
No, I mean, you collect the data and you store it into, for example, your smartphone.
Of course, it's impossible in some cases to store all the data in here.
So,
And all the data may be stored in here, right?
So you have to move your data to another cloud.
Yeah. Or maybe extend your quota in Google Drive or Dropbox by paying some small amount of money monthly. But even now, this guy provides 15 gigabytes for free, and that would be quite enough for the moment, like 2-3 years.
But does this spec always store the encrypted data?
Yeah.
Second question is about the mediator. Could you please turn the mediator? No, some previous.
Yeah.
So this mediator will match some kind of request from user to some vendors. So I'm wondering if this mediator do not read raw data, how could it understand?
So the format of these requests and advertisement must be standardized in such a way that the computer can, detect the meaning, understand the meaning in some formal language.
So is that a risk?
Yeah, vendors will be able to, structurize their advertisement in order to make money, right? And also, these requests would be expressed in a formal way using some kind of application. And so there will be, I hope, useful applications to assist individual users to compose, express this kind of needs in a formal way.
Okay.
That's a research issue, of course.
There's a big worry about that AI can understand some encrypted data.
No, they are not encrypted when matching is carried out. So decrypted data are matched against each other, of course. Any other questions?
First of all, thank you very much for your talk. It's a really fascinating framework. The question I have would be about
you mentioned that this system could potentially break down some market monopolies. But one thing would be the common framework, which would probably grow very rapidly as different services come on board. But what would be stopping some companies from keeping their market monopoly by just developing an add-on to the basic PLR system for their own proprietary systems? I guess one example would be, for example, I'm a cyclist and I use an application called Strava, which saves a lot of my training data and so on, which is very useful. But to build that into sort of a framework used by all companies and all services, there need to be some kind of open framework for the new companies coming in with new kinds of data. There would have to be some sort of regulation to make sure that they share a framework rather than use their own.
Yeah, so there are several points relevant here. One is there is a possibility for the governments to set up some regulations to mandate smart disclosure in order to spread distributed data management all over society. And second is, as I said earlier, individuals are more important as data sources. So vendors have a great necessity to access the individual to obtain data. And in order to do that, they are forced to do smart disclosure. And the result that it will be the same. So there will be some mixture of these two aspects. So some part of some smart disclosure in some special situations would be mandated by some law or regulation. But smart disclosures in other aspects of the society would be induced for the sake of each vendor's benefits. So market mechanism would induce them to do smart disclosure if some important part of the economy is running by smart disclosure and PDS-based data circulation. So in this program of real-world data circulation, you are engaged in many research themes, like analyzing some particular data to do this and that services and so on and so forth. But I'd like you to pay more attention to how to collect and share data, in particular personal data, to realize those very important and high-quality services. And that's the message I have to convey in this lecture. Thank you very much.